The neon signs of New Terra Station flickered against the endless void of space, casting rainbow shadows across the docking bays where ships from 100 different worlds came to rest. Among the sleek diplomatic vessels and massive cargo haulers, one establishment stood out like a warm beacon of home: Murphy's Interstellar Tavern. Jack Murphy wiped down another glass with practiced ease, his weathered hands moving in the same rhythm they had for the past 15 years. The tavern wasn't much to look at from the outside, squeezed between a tech shop and a spice merchant, but inside it felt like Earth. Real wood paneling lined the walls, salvaged from an old Earth freighter. The smell of genuine hops and barley filled the air, mixed with the comforting aroma of his grandmother's stew recipe that he'd managed to recreate using ingredients from across the galaxy. The evening crowd was typical for a Tuesday. A group of miners celebrating a successful haul sat at the corner table, their blue-tinted skin glowing softly under the warm lighting. Two diplomats argued quietly in their musical language while nursing glasses of expensive wine. A lone human cargo pilot stared into his beer, probably calculating hyperspace routes for his next run. Jack had opened Murphy's when he'd finally saved enough credits to retire from his cargo hauling days. He'd seen enough of the galaxy to know that every species, no matter how different, shared one universal truth. Sometimes you needed a place to sit down, have a drink, and forget about the universe for a while. The door chimed as another customer entered, and Jack looked up from his glass polishing. The newcomer was clearly not human, standing nearly 8 feet tall with scales that shifted color in the light, ranging from deep emerald to brilliant gold. The being's face was elongated, almost reptilian, with intelligent amber eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. Despite the alien features, there was something unmistakably regal about the way the creature carried itself. What caught Jack's attention wasn't the being's impressive size or exotic appearance, though. It was the way the creature hesitated at the entrance, looking around the tavern with an expression Jack had seen countless times before. Loneliness. The kind of bone-deep isolation that came from being far from home with nowhere else to go. The scaled being eventually made its way to the far end of the bar, settling onto a reinforced stool that Jack kept specifically for larger patrons. The creature's movements were careful and deliberate, as if unused to being in such confined spaces. "Evening," Jack said, setting down his towel and approaching with a friendly smile. "What can I get you?" The being's amber eyes studied Jack for a moment, and when it spoke, its voice carried a strange musical quality that seemed to resonate in the air. "I am unfamiliar with your establishment's offerings. What would you recommend for one who has traveled far?" Jack could hear the exhaustion beneath the formal words, the careful pronunciation that suggested standard Galactic wasn't this being's first language. "Well, depends on what you're looking for. Something strong to wash away the road dust, or something smooth to help you think." "I require neither strength nor contemplation," the creature said quietly. "Perhaps something that tastes of home." That was a request Jack heard often, and it always hit him in the chest. He'd learned early in his tavern-keeping career that homesickness was a universal constant, affecting every spacefaring species in the galaxy. The trick was figuring out what home meant to each individual. "Tell you what," Jack said, reaching for a bottle of his special reserve. "This is something I've been working on. It's got honey from the highland meadows of Earth, mixed with a grain alcohol that reminds me of summers on my family's farm. But I've added a few things I picked up in my traveling days. Spices from 442b that warm you from the inside, and a touch of crystallized starlight from the Veil Nebula that makes everything taste like, well, like possibility." The scaled being tilted its head, clearly intrigued. "You create your own beverages?" "Been experimenting for years," Jack said, pouring the golden liquid into a clean glass. "Found that most folks aren't just looking for alcohol, they're looking for a feeling, a memory, sometimes they're looking for hope." He slid the glass across the bar. "This one's on the house, call it a welcome to Murphy's drink." The creature stared at the glass for a long moment, and Jack could swear he saw something like surprise flicker across its features. "You would offer hospitality to a stranger without expectation of payment." "Friend, I've been pouring drinks for 15 years on this station. I can spot someone who needs a kind gesture from 3 systems away." Jack leaned against the bar, his posture relaxed and open. "Besides, first drink's always free for new customers. House rule." The being carefully lifted the glass with long, clawed fingers and brought it to its lips. The first sip was cautious, experimental. Then the creature's amber eyes widened slightly, and it took a longer drink. This is, the being paused, seeming to search for words. It tastes of sunrise over crystal mountains, of the songs my people sing when the twin moons rise together. The creature looked up at Jack with something approaching wonder. How did you know? Jack shrugged, pleased with the reaction. Lucky guess. I've got a theory that all intelligent species have certain taste memories in common, sweetness that reminds them of safety, warmth that brings back thoughts of family. The trick is finding the right combination. He began cleaning another glass, keeping his movements casual and non-threatening. Name's Jack Murphy, by the way. This is my place. I am, the creature hesitated again, and Jack got the impression it was deciding how much to reveal. I am called Zephyr among my people. I thank you for your generosity, Jack Murphy. Just Jack is fine, and you're welcome. Jack noticed that several of his other patrons had glanced over at the newcomer, but none seemed particularly concerned. One of the benefits of running a tavern on an interstellar station was that his customers were used to seeing all kinds of beings. So what brings you to New Terra Station, if you don't mind me asking? Zephyr took another sip of the drink, and Jack could see some of the tension leaving the being's shoulders. I am between destinations. My ship requires repairs, and I find myself with time to spare. There was something carefully neutral about the way Zephyr spoke, as if choosing each word deliberately. Well, you picked a good place to kill time. Station's got everything you need, and we're pretty peaceful here. Jack gestured around the tavern. This place sees beings from all over the galaxy. Traders, diplomats, explorers, folks just trying to make a living among the stars. Everyone's welcome as long as they keep the peace. You have built something admirable here, Zephyr said, looking around the tavern with new interest. A sanctuary where different peoples can gather without conflict. That was always the idea, Jack said. I spent a lot of years hauling cargo across the galaxy, and I saw how most places treated aliens. Either they were excluded entirely, or they were tolerated but never really welcome. Figured the universe needed at least one place where everyone could just be people. Zephyr's amber eyes studied Jack intently. You speak of aliens as though you do not consider yourself among them. Jack laughed. Good point. I suppose from your perspective I'm the alien here. Funny how that works, isn't it? Everyone's foreign to someone. Indeed. Zephyr took another long sip of the drink, and Jack could see the being slowly relaxing. Your philosophy is refreshing. In my travels, I have encountered many who view difference as threat rather than opportunity. Their loss, Jack said simply. Some of the most interesting conversations I've ever had were with folks who saw the universe completely differently than I did, opened my eyes to things I never would have considered. He refilled Zephyr's glass without being asked. What's your like? Zephyr was quiet for a moment, swirling the golden liquid in the glass. It is a place of great beauty and terrible responsibility. Mountains that touch the stars, oceans that reflect the light of twin suns. My people have lived, therefore, building something that we hope will endure. Sounds like paradise, Jack said, though he caught the note of sadness in Zephyr's voice. Paradise can become a prison when duty calls you elsewhere, Zephyr said quietly. Sometimes the weight of expectation becomes burdensome. Jack nodded knowingly. I hear that. Spent 10 years hauling cargo because it was expected of me. Family business, you understand. Took me a long time to realize that just because you're good at something doesn't mean it's what you're meant to do. How did you find the courage to choose your own path? Met a wise old trader who told me something I'll never forget. He said that the universe is vast enough for everyone to find their place, but small enough that every choice matters. Made me realize that I wasn't just disappointing people by following my own dreams. I was robbing them of the chance to see what I could become when I was truly happy. Zephyr set down the glass and looked at Jack with newfound respect. Wise words from an unexpected source. That's the thing about traveling the galaxy, Jack said. Wisdom comes from the strangest places. Sometimes it's a philosopher on Rigel Prime, sometimes it's a cargo hauler who just wants to open a tavern. He smiled. Sometimes it's a lonely dragon who walks into your bar and reminds you why you started this place in the first place. Zephyr's eyes widened slightly. You knew. Jack chuckled. Friend, I've been serving drinks to every species in the galaxy for 15 years. You learn to recognize the signs, the way you move like you're used to much more space, the careful way you speak like someone who's used to their words carrying weight, and those scales of yours change color with your emotions. Right now they're more gold than green, which tells me you're feeling better than when you walked in. Remarkable, Zephyr murmured. Most beings cannot discern such details about my people. Most beings aren't looking, Jack said. They see the size, the scales, the obviously non-human features, and they stop paying attention. But if you're going to serve people, really serve them, you have to see past the surface. Zephyr finished the drink and set the glass down gently. I have not experienced such acceptance in longer than I care to remember. Your kindness is a gift I had not expected to receive. Everyone deserves kindness, Jack said simply, especially when they're far from home. The tavern had grown busier as the evening progressed. The miners had started singing one of their working songs, their harmonized voices adding to the warm atmosphere. A group of young humans from a nearby research station had claimed a table near the viewport, pointing out constellations to each other. The diplomats had apparently resolved their argument and were now laughing over their wine. Zephyr observed it all with a contemplative expression. You have created something truly special here, Jack Murphy, a place where differences are celebrated rather than feared. That's the human way, I suppose, Jack said, then caught himself. Well, the way I think it should be anyway. We're all just trying to make our way in this big universe. Doesn't matter if you've got scales or tentacles or 3 eyes. We all want the same basic things. A place to belong, people who understand us, and maybe a good drink at the end of a long day. Perhaps, Zephyr said thoughtfully, though I wonder if all humans share your perspective. Probably not, Jack admitted. But that's okay. Change happens one conversation at a time, one drink at a time. Someone comes in here feeling suspicious or afraid, and they leave having shared a table with someone completely different from them. Maybe they realize that different doesn't mean dangerous. Zephyr stood slowly, reaching into a pouch that Jack hadn't noticed before. You have given me more than drink tonight, Jack Murphy. You have given me hope that understanding between peoples is possible. Keep the credits, Jack said, waving away the offered payment. Like I said, first drinks on the house, but if you're going to be on the station for a while, feel free to come back. Always enjoy good conversation. Zephyr paused, seeming to consider something carefully. I may indeed return. There is something to be said for a place where one can simply exist without pretense. Doors always open, Jack said warmly. As Zephyr made their way toward the exit, several patrons nodded friendly goodbyes. The dragon paused at the door and looked back at Jack one more time. Thank you, Zephyr said simply, for reminding me that kindness exists in unexpected places. After Zephyr left, Jack continued serving his customers, but his mind kept returning to the conversation. There had been something about the dragon that spoke to him, a loneliness that ran deeper than simple homesickness. He'd seen that look before in the mirror during his cargo hauling days, when duty and expectation felt like chains around his soul. The evening wore on, and eventually the last customer headed back to their ship or quarters. Jack cleaned up the tavern, stacking chairs and wiping down tables, but his thoughts remained with the lonely dragon who had walked into his establishment looking for nothing more than a drink and had found something approaching hope. As he locked up for the night, Jack looked out at the stars visible through the station's massive viewports. Somewhere out there was Zephyr's, a place of crystal mountains and twin suns where duty weighed heavy on those who cared enough to bear it. Jack had learned long ago that everyone carried their own burdens, their own struggles with expectation and responsibility. He'd also learned that sometimes the smallest gestures, a free drink and a listening ear, could make the difference between despair and hope. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new stories, new opportunities to practice the simple human art of kindness. And if he was lucky, maybe a certain dragon would stop by again, looking for another taste of home among the stars. 3 days passed before Zephyr returned to Murphy's interstellar tavern, and when the dragon entered during the afternoon lull, Jack noticed several immediate changes. The scales that had shifted between emerald and gold during their first meeting now held flecks of silver, and there was a subtle tension in the way Zephyr moved, like a coiled spring held barely in check. Afternoon, Zephyr, Jack called out cheerfully, automatically reaching for the bottle of his special reserve. How are those ship repairs coming along? Zephyr settled onto the same reinforced stool, but instead of the careful, deliberate movements from before, there was an agitated energy about the dragon. The repairs proceed slowly. It seems my vessel requires components that are difficult to procure on this station. Jack poured the golden drink and slid it across the bar, nodding that Zephyr's usual formal speech pattern seemed more strained than before. Need anything special? I know most of the suppliers on the station. Might be able to point you in the right direction. Your kindness is appreciated, but this matter requires discretion. Zephyr took a long drink, and Jack watched as some of the tension seemed to drain from the dragon's shoulders. Tell me, Jack Murphy, what do you know of galactic politics? Jack laughed, continuing to clean glasses as they talked. About as little as possible, if I'm being honest. Learned a long time ago that politics and tavern keeping don't mix well. Someone's always got an opinion about somebody else's government, and next thing you know, there's a fight over whose home system has the better trade policies. A wise approach, Zephyr said, though there was something almost wistful in the dragon's voice. Yet sometimes one cannot escape the reach of politics, no matter how far one travels. Sounds like you're speaking from experience. Jack leaned against the bar, giving Zephyr his full attention. Want to talk about it? Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, staring into the drink as if it held answers to unspoken questions. Have you ever found yourself in a position where every choice you make affects the lives of countless others, where a single decision could mean prosperity or disaster for entire worlds? The question was asked so quietly that Jack had to strain to hear it over the ambient noise of the tavern. There was pain in Zephyr's voice, a weight of responsibility that made Jack's own struggles with family expectations seem trivial in comparison. Can't say I have, Jack admitted. Worst decision I ever had to make was whether to keep hauling cargo for my family's business or open this place. Even then, the only life really affected was my own. He paused, studying Zephyr's expression. Sounds like you're dealing with something a lot bigger. Indeed. Zephyr took another sip, and Jack noticed that the dragon's clawed hands were trembling slightly. There are those who would say I am shirking my duties by remaining here, others who would claim I am selfish for wanting something different than what was planned for me. Let me guess, Jack said gently, family business. Zephyr's laugh was bitter and short. One might say that. A business that has consumed my family for generations, demanding sacrifice after sacrifice in the name of duty and honor. Jack nodded knowingly. I get it. My family's been hauling cargo for 3 generations. My grandfather started the business, my father expanded it, and everyone just assumed I'd carry it on. Took me 35 years to work up the courage to tell them I wanted something different. How did they react? About as well as you'd expect. Lots of shouting about tradition and responsibility. Dad didn't speak to me for 6 months. Jack smiled ruefully. But eventually they came around. Turns out they'd rather have a son who was happy doing something else than one who was miserable doing what they expected. Your family sounds remarkably understanding, Zephyr said. Mine would not be so accommodating. The expectations placed upon me are not easily abandoned. Before Jack could respond, the tavern's door chimed, and 3 figures entered that immediately set Jack's instincts on high alert. They were humanoid but clearly not human, with pale blue skin and unnaturally perfect features that suggested genetic modification. Their clothing was expensive but understated, and they moved with the fluid grace of professional soldiers. The lead figure's eyes swept the tavern with clinical efficiency before settling on Zephyr. The dragon's scales immediately shifted to a deep, dark green that Jack had never seen before, and the tension that had been building throughout their conversation suddenly crystallized into something that felt dangerous. We should speak privately, the lead figure said, approaching the bar with measured steps. Their voice carried an accent Jack couldn't place, but there was authority in every word. I have nothing to say to the council's representatives, Zephyr replied, not bothering to turn around. And certainly nothing that requires privacy. Jack's hand instinctively moved toward the plasma pistol he kept hidden behind the bar. In 15 years of running the tavern, he'd only had to draw it twice, but he'd learned to trust his gut when it came to potential trouble. Your Magnificence, the lead figure said, and Jack caught the slight emphasis on the title. Your absence has been noted. There are matters of state that require your immediate attention. Magnificence? Jack muttered under his breath, pieces of a puzzle suddenly clicking together in his mind. The regal bearing, the careful word choices, the weight of responsibility that seemed to crush Zephyr's spirit. This wasn't just any dragon sitting in his tavern. I am on personal leave, Zephyr said firmly. The council approved my request for time away from official duties. Circumstances have changed, another of the figures spoke up. The hegemony has made demands that require an imperial response. Jack's blood ran cold. Imperial response. He'd served drinks to diplomats and politicians before, but never to someone whose personal decisions could affect entire star systems. And yet, looking at Zephyr sitting at his bar, nursing a drink and struggling with the same basic questions about duty versus happiness that plagued beings across the galaxy, Jack found himself oddly unsurprised. "The hegemony can wait," Zephyr said, finally turning to face the three figures. "Their demands are unreasonable, and responding in haste will only weaken our position. With respect, Your Magnificence, that decision is not yours alone to make," the lead figure replied. "The Council requires your presence for the emergency session tomorrow." Jack cleared his throat, drawing the attention of all four beings. "I hate to interrupt what seems like an important conversation, but this is a public establishment. If you need to discuss sensitive matters, there's a private room in the back." "That won't be necessary," Zephyr said, standing slowly from the stool. The dragon's full height was impressive enough, but there was something else now, an aura of authority that seemed to fill the entire tavern. These representatives were just leaving. "Your Magnificence," the lead figure tried again, but Zephyr held up a clawed hand for silence. "I will return when I am ready to return. Until then, the Council will have to manage without me." The dragon's voice had taken on a commanding tone that brooked no argument. "You may inform them that their Emperor requires additional time to consider all options before making decisions that could affect billions of lives." Emperor, the word hung in the air like a thunderclap, and Jack found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about his lonely customer. The being who had sat at his bar for the past hour, struggling with feelings of isolation and the weight of expectation, was the ruler of what was apparently a vast interstellar empire. The three figures exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to openly defy their ruler. "As you command, Your Magnificence, but please consider the urgency of the situation." After they left, the tavern fell into an uncomfortable silence. Several of Jack's regular customers had witnessed the exchange, and while none seemed to fully understand what had just transpired, everyone could sense that the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Zephyr slowly settled back onto the stool, but the regal presence that had manifested during the confrontation didn't entirely fade. The dragon looked older somehow, burdened by the weight of a crown that Jack couldn't see but could clearly feel. "So," Jack said finally, refilling Zephyr's glass with steady hands, "Emperor Huh." "Indeed." Zephyr's voice was quiet again, but there was a defensiveness there that hadn't existed before. "Does this change your opinion of me, Jack Murphy?" Jack considered the question seriously, looking at the being who had been coming to his tavern for honest conversation and a drink that tasted like home. "Well, it explains why you carry yourself like someone used to being obeyed, and why those ship repairs are taking so long if you're trying to avoid attention." "That is not what I asked." "No, it doesn't change my opinion," Jack said firmly. "You're still the same being who walked into my bar looking lonely and tired. Title doesn't change that." He paused, then grinned. "Though I have to admit, this is definitely the most interesting customer service challenge I've ever faced." Zephyr's scales shifted back toward their usual emerald and gold, and something that might have been relief flickered across the dragon's features. "You truly are remarkable, Jack Murphy. Most beings, upon learning of my position, either become obsequiously deferential or attempt to curry favor." "What's the point of either?" Jack asked pragmatically. "You came here to get away from being treated like an emperor. Seems counterproductive for me to start now." "More than you realize," Zephyr said softly. "I have not had a conversation with someone who saw me simply as myself in longer than I care to remember. Every word spoken in my presence is calculated, every gesture designed to please or manipulate." Jack leaned against the bar, his expression sympathetic. "That sounds incredibly isolating." "It is." Zephyr took a long drink, savoring the taste that had first drawn them to Murphy's. "Do you know what it is like to make decisions that affect billions of lives, knowing that no matter what you choose, countless beings will suffer the consequences?" "Can't imagine," Jack said honestly. "But I'm guessing it's the kind of weight that could crush someone if they tried to carry it alone." "Indeed, and yet that is precisely what is expected of me. The Empire spans 17 star systems, with over 40 billion citizens depending on my leadership. Every policy decision, every diplomatic choice, every response to threats like the hegemony could mean the difference between prosperity and war. Jack whistled softly. 40 billion people, that's a lot of responsibility for one person. My advisors would say that I was born to bear such responsibility, that the blood of emperors flows in my veins, granting me wisdom beyond that of common beings. Zephyr's laugh was bitter. Yet here I sit, hiding in a human tavern because I no longer trust my own judgment. What happened? Jack asked gently. What made you lose confidence? Zephyr was quiet for so long that Jack began to think the question wouldn't be answered. Finally, the dragon spoke, voice barely above a whisper. 6 months ago, I authorized a military intervention to protect a mining colony from raiders. It seemed like a simple decision, protect innocent civilians from criminal attacks. But the raiders were desperate refugees from a system we had blockaded during a trade dispute. My intervention resulted in the deaths of beings who were only trying to survive my previous decisions. Jack could see the pain in Zephyr's amber eyes, the guilt that had been eating away at the dragon's confidence. Sounds like you were in an impossible situation. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Perhaps, but when you hold the power of life and death over billions, there should be no room for error. Every choice must be perfect, every decision beyond reproach. Zephyr's claws scraped against the surface of the bar. Yet I find myself making mistake after mistake, each one compounding the last. With respect, Your Magnificence, Jack said, deliberately using the formal title, that's complete garbage. Zephyr's head snapped up, eyes widening in shock. Apparently, no one had ever spoken to the Dragon Emperor quite so bluntly. Perfect decisions don't exist, Jack continued, warming to his theme. Every choice has consequences you can't predict, variables you can't control. The best anyone can do is gather the information they have, consider the options available, and make the choice that seems right at the time. But when those choices affect so many lives, the principle doesn't change, Jack interrupted. Scale doesn't alter the fundamental nature of decision-making. Whether you're choosing what drink to serve a customer or whether to intervene in a conflict, you work with what you know and accept that you can't control every outcome. Zephyr stared at Jack for a long moment. You speak with startling wisdom for someone who claims to avoid politics. Maybe because I avoid politics, Jack replied with a smile. Sometimes an outside perspective is exactly what someone needs. The dragon finished the drink and set the glass down thoughtfully. My advisors would be scandalized to know I am taking counsel from a human tavern keeper. Good thing they're not here then, Jack said, refilling the glass without being asked. Besides, some of the best advice I ever got came from unexpected sources. Sometimes wisdom has nothing to do with credentials. Indeed, Zephyr took a sip of the fresh drink. Tell me, Jack Murphy, if you were in my position, how would you handle the hegemony situation? Wouldn't presume to tell an emperor how to run an empire, Jack said diplomatically. But if I were dealing with someone making unreasonable demands, I'd probably start by figuring out what they really want versus what they're asking for. Explain. Well, in my cargo hauling days, I dealt with a lot of difficult customers. Sometimes they demand impossible delivery schedules or unreasonable prices. But if you dug deeper, what they really needed was reassurance that their cargo would arrive safely or confirmation that they weren't being cheated. Jack wiped down the bar as he talked. The unreasonable demands were usually symptoms of deeper concerns. Zephyr nodded slowly. The hegemony demands territorial concessions and trade privileges that would cripple our economy, but perhaps their true concern is security or fear of being overwhelmed by our technological advantages. Possible, Jack agreed. Might be worth finding out before you respond to their demands. My advisors have recommended a show of force to demonstrate our strength, Zephyr said thoughtfully. But perhaps a different approach would yield better results. Like I said, I wouldn't presume to tell you how to handle it, but sometimes the unexpected response is the most effective one. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the other patrons go about their evening routines. The miners were engaged in their usual card game, the diplomats were reviewing star charts, and a group of human researchers were debating the implications of a recent archaeological discovery. Thank you, Zephyr said eventually, for treating me as I am rather than what I represent, for offering perspective without agenda, for reminding me that wisdom can come from unexpected sources. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, Jack replied. Takes courage to be vulnerable, especially when you're used to being seen as invincible. Zephyr stood to leave, but paused at the door. Jack Murphy, would you consider accepting a position as an advisor to the Imperial Court? Jack laughed, genuinely surprised by the offer. That's flattering, but I think I'll stick to pouring drinks. Besides, something tells me you'll figure out the right answers on your own. You just needed someone to remind you to trust your instincts. Perhaps you are correct, but the offer remains open should you ever wish for a change of scenery. After Zephyr left, Jack found himself staring out at the stars, wondering what it would be like to carry the weight of an entire empire. He'd complained about family expectations and the pressure to conform, but his struggles seemed insignificant compared to the burden carried by the lonely dragon who had found solace in his humble tavern. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for both of them. Zephyr would return to face the demands of empire, while Jack would continue serving drinks to beings from across the galaxy. But tonight, in the warm glow of Murphy's interstellar tavern, an emperor and a tavern keeper had shared something precious. An honest conversation between equals, free from the weight of titles and expectations. As Jack closed up for the night, he reflected on the strange turns life could take. A simple act of kindness, offering a free drink to a lonely stranger, had led to one of the most meaningful conversations of his life. It reminded him why he'd opened the tavern in the first place, to create a space where all beings could find acceptance, understanding, and perhaps a little wisdom along the way. 2 weeks had passed since Jack had last seen Zephyr, and the absence weighed on his mind more than he cared to admit. The Dragon Emperor had left New Terra Station the morning after their conversation about the hegemony crisis, summoned back to face the emergency session that would determine the fate of billions of beings across 17 star systems. Jack found himself watching the news feeds with new interest, scanning for any mention of the Empire or signs of the conflict that Zephyr had been dreading. The Galactic News Network spoke in carefully neutral terms about rising tensions and diplomatic consultations, but Jack could read between the lines. War was a very real possibility, and somewhere in the middle of it all was a lonely dragon who had questioned every decision while sitting at a simple Earth-style bar. The evening crowd at Murphy's was lighter than usual. A trade route disruption had delayed several of the regular cargo shipments, leaving the station quieter than normal. Jack himself with inventory and cleaning, but his thoughts kept drifting to amber eyes and scales that shifted color with emotion. The door chimed at precisely 8 o'clock, and Jack looked up to see a figure in a hooded cloak entering the tavern. The newcomer moved with familiar grace, and when they settled onto the reinforced stool at the far end of the bar, Jack felt a smile spread across his face. "Evening, stranger," Jack said, reaching for the bottle of his special reserve. "How'd that meeting go?" Zephyr pulled back the hood, revealing scales that shimmered with new colors Jack had never seen before, deep purple shot through with silver, like the night sky touched with starlight. The dragon's amber eyes held a different quality now, a sense of resolution that hadn't been there before. "Better than expected, though not in the way I had anticipated," Zephyr said, accepting the offered drink with obvious gratitude. "Your advice proved more valuable than you might imagine." "My advice?" Jack leaned against the bar, genuinely curious. "All I did was suggest you figure out what the hegemony really wanted." Indeed, such simple wisdom, yet it changed everything. Zephyr took a long drink, and Jack watched as some of the tension melted from the dragon's posture. "I arrived at the emergency session to find my advisors preparing for war. Battle plans had been drawn, fleets were being mobilized, and the council was debating which systems to sacrifice to protect our core worlds." Jack winced. Sounds like they were expecting the worst. They were preparing for the inevitable, or so they believed. The hegemony's demands were seen as an act of aggression that required a military response. Zephyr's claws traced patterns on the bar's surface. "But I remembered our conversation about unreasonable demands and deeper concerns. So instead of approving the battle plans, I asked a simple question. What does the hegemony actually fear?" And my intelligence advisors were forced to admit they had focused entirely on the hegemony's military capabilities and political demands. No one had bothered to investigate the underlying motivations driving their actions. Zephyr's scales shifted toward gold, indicating what Jack had learned was satisfaction or contentment. "So I ordered a comprehensive analysis of hegemony society, economy, and internal politics." Jack poured himself a glass of human whiskey, sensing this was going to be a story worth savoring. "What did you find?" "The hegemony is dying," Zephyr said simply. Not from war or conquest, but from resource depletion and technological stagnation. Their core worlds are overpopulated and polluted, their outer colonies are failing, and their people are desperate. The aggressive expansion and unreasonable demands weren't acts of strength. They were the desperate actions of a civilization facing extinction. So what did you do? I did something that shocked everyone, including myself. Instead of responding to their demands with military force, I invited their leadership to a summit. Not to negotiate their surrender or dictate terms, but to discuss mutual aid and technological exchange. Jack nearly choked on his whiskey. You offered to help them after they threatened your empire. I offered to save them, Zephyr corrected. The Empire has technologies that could restore their polluted worlds and techniques for sustainable resource management that could extend their civilization for. In exchange, they possess cultural knowledge and artistic traditions that would enrich our society immeasurably. How did your advisors react to that? Zephyr's laugh was rueful. About as well as you might expect. Half the council accused me of weakness, the other half questioned my sanity. My military commanders warned that showing mercy to enemies would only encourage future aggression. But you went ahead with it anyway. I did, and do you know what happened when I presented the offer to the hegemony leadership? Zephyr's scales were now predominantly gold, shot through with silver highlights that seemed to dance in the tavern's warm lighting. Their supreme commander, a being who had spent decades preparing for war against us, broke down and wept, not from defeat or humiliation, but from relief. Jack set down his glass, completely absorbed in the story. They accepted. More than accepted. They embraced the proposal with a desperation that made clear just how close they had come to complete collapse. Within days, we had teams of engineers and scientists working together on solutions that neither civilization could have achieved alone. That's incredible, Jack said, genuinely amazed. But surely it wasn't that simple. There must have been complications, resistance from both sides. Many complications, Zephyr agreed. Trust doesn't develop overnight, especially between former enemies. There were incidents, misunderstandings, cultural conflicts that nearly derailed the entire process. Some of my own nobles attempted a coup, claiming I had betrayed the Empire by showing weakness to our enemies. Jack's eyes widened. A coup, what happened? I did something that no emperor had done in over 1,000 years. I abdicated. The simple statement hit Jack like a physical blow. You gave up the throne. Temporarily, Zephyr clarified, though there was something in the dragon's voice that suggested the decision hadn't been as simple as the word implied. I announced that I was stepping down from imperial duties to personally oversee the cultural exchange program with the hegemony. My cousin, who had been heir apparent, assumed the throne with the understanding that my abdication was conditional. Conditional how? If the peace initiative succeeds, proving that cooperation is more effective than conquest, I will resume my position with a mandate for major reforms. If it fails, will remain emperor, and I will accept exile rather than return to the policies that nearly led us to war. Jack stared at Zephyr, trying to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. You bet your entire future on an untested idea. Everything you've worked for, everything your family built, you risked it all on the hope that enemies could become allies. Not just hope, Zephyr said quietly. Conviction. Our conversation helped me realize that I had been approaching leadership from a position of fear rather than wisdom. Fear of making mistakes, fear of appearing weak, fear of challenging the expectations placed upon me. The dragon's amber eyes met Jack's. But true strength isn't about never failing. It's about having the courage to choose the right path even when others cannot see where it leads. And is it working? The peace initiative. Zephyr's scales shifted to a warm, brilliant gold that seemed to illuminate the entire bar. Beyond our wildest expectations. The first joint colony was established last month, combining terraforming technology with hegemony agricultural methods. The results are remarkable. A world that will be fully habitable within 5 years instead of the 50 it would have taken either civilization working alone. That's amazing, Jack said, feeling a warm pride that surprised him with its intensity. What about the cultural exchange part? Even more successful than the technological cooperation. Hegemony, poets, and artists have brought new perspectives to society, while our philosophers and scientists have helped them rediscover traditions that had been lost during their period of decline. Zephyr paused, taking another drink. There's something else, though. Something I wanted to share with you personally. What's that? The first permanent settlement on the joint colony. The council voted unanimously to name it Murphy's Landing. Jack nearly dropped his glass. They what? When I told them about a human tavern keeper who had shown kindness to a stranger, who had offered wisdom without agenda and friendship without expectation, they were deeply moved. The settlement will be built around principles of hospitality and cultural exchange, a place where beings from different worlds can come together as equals, just as they do here. Jack found himself speechless, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. The idea that his simple tavern had inspired something so significant seemed almost impossible to believe. There's more, Zephyr continued. Both the Empire and the former hegemony territories have agreed to establish what we're calling Murphy houses throughout our space, neutral establishments where beings of all species can gather without political interference, places where the art of honest conversation can flourish. I don't know what to say, Jack managed. That's the most incredible thing anyone's ever told me. You deserve to know the impact your kindness has had, Zephyr said warmly. A simple gesture, offering a free drink to a lonely stranger, has rippled outward to touch billions of lives. Children who would have grown up as enemies will instead learn cooperation. Technologies that would have been turned toward weapons of war are now being used to heal dying worlds. Jack shook his head in amazement. All I did was pour drinks and listen. Anyone would have done the same. Perhaps, but not everyone would have seen past the surface to recognize that even emperors sometimes need a friend. Zephyr's voice grew serious. Which brings me to why I'm really here tonight. Oh. In 3 days, I will resume the throne of the Empire. The peace initiative has been deemed a complete success, and both civilizations have voted to make the alliance permanent. But accepting the crown again means accepting the isolation that comes with absolute power. Zephyr paused, seeming to gather courage for what came next. Unless, of course, I had an advisor whose wisdom I trusted implicitly. Someone who had already proven capable of seeing solutions that escaped trained diplomats and military strategists. Jack laughed, but not unkindly. We've been through this before. I'm a tavern keeper, not a political advisor. You're a human who understands that strength comes from compassion, that true leadership means serving others rather than commanding them. You're someone who can see past titles and positions to the being underneath. Zephyr's amber eyes were intense with conviction. The Empire needs that perspective if we're going to build something better than what came before. What exactly are you asking? Come with me, Zephyr said simply. Help me build an empire based on cooperation instead of conquest, on understanding instead of fear. The position would be newly created, Ambassador for Understanding, with authority to establish Murphy houses throughout our territory and beyond. Jack was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. The idea of leaving his tavern, his comfortable life on New Terra Station, seemed almost unthinkable. But then he thought about the lonely dragon who had walked through his door 3 weeks ago, carrying the weight of an empire and the fear of making decisions that could destroy billions of lives. What would happen to this place? Jack asked, gesturing around the tavern that had been his life for 15 years. It would become the first official Murphy house, a training ground for others who want to learn the art of creating neutral space where all beings can feel welcome. I've already spoken with the station administrator. They're enthusiastic about the prestige of hosting an imperial cultural center. Jack looked around his tavern, seeing it with new eyes. The warm lighting, the comfortable furniture, the carefully chosen decorations that made beings from across the galaxy feel at home. It could all be replicated, expanded, turned into something bigger than he had ever imagined. And you really think I could make a difference, on the scale you're talking about? Jack Murphy, in the span of 3 conversations, you helped prevent a war that would have consumed billions of lives. You challenged an emperor to think differently about leadership and inspired the creation of the most successful peace initiative in galactic history. Zephyr's scales were now a brilliant mixture of gold and silver, more beautiful than anything Jack had ever seen. I think you can make any difference you set your mind to. Jack made his decision with surprising ease. Perhaps it was the influence of Zephyr's conviction, or maybe it was the realization that the universe had just offered him the chance to expand his simple philosophy of kindness on a scale he'd never dreamed possible. All right, he said, extending his hand in the traditional human gesture of agreement. Let's build something amazing. Zephyr carefully took Jack's hand with clawed fingers, understanding the significance of the gesture. Together, we will create something that neither humans nor could achieve alone. A new model for civilization based on the radical idea that different doesn't mean enemy. As they sat in Murphy's interstellar tavern for what would be the last time as emperor and tavern keeper, Jack reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A lonely dragon seeking solace in a human establishment had found not just comfort, but the courage to reshape the very nature of interstellar civilization. And a simple tavern keeper who had always believed in the power of kindness was about to discover just how far that philosophy could reach. The stars outside the station's viewport seemed brighter than usual, as if the universe itself was celebrating the birth of something new. Somewhere among those distant suns, former enemies were working together to build a better future. Children of different species would grow up learning that cooperation was possible, that understanding could triumph over fear. All because a human had once offered a free drink to a stranger who needed a friend. In the days that followed, as news of Jack's appointment spread throughout the station, his regular customers came to say goodbye and wish him well. The miners presented him with a crystal from there, carved with symbols representing friendship across the void. The diplomats composed a song in his honor, their musical language creating harmonies that brought tears to his eyes. But perhaps the most meaningful farewell came from an unexpected source. As Jack was packing the last of his personal belongings, a small ship docked at the station, and three figures in expensive but understated clothing entered the tavern. Jack recognized them immediately as the representatives who had come to collect Zephyr weeks earlier. "Jack Murphy," the lead figure said, approaching with a formal bow that seemed somehow different than their previous meeting. "We come bearing a message from the Imperial Council." Jack straightened, wondering if Zephyr's political enemies had decided to make trouble. "What kind of message?" "An apology," the figure said, surprising Jack completely. "We misjudged both you and our emperor. Your influence prevented a catastrophic war and opened possibilities that our traditional thinking never could have conceived." The representative paused, seeming to struggle with words. "We also come to offer our gratitude and to pledge our support for your new position." "That's unexpected," Jack admitted. "Thank you." "The Empire owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid," another of the figures added. "But we hope to honor it by ensuring that your vision of understanding between species becomes reality throughout our territory." As Jack watched the representatives leave, he reflected on how much had changed since a lonely dragon had walked into his tavern seeking nothing more than a drink that tasted like home. Now, that dragon was about to resume the throne of a vast empire, armed with new perspectives on leadership and cooperation. And a simple tavern keeper was about to embark on the greatest adventure of his life, helping to build a future where kindness could be as powerful as any weapon. The final night in Murphy's interstellar tavern was quiet, with only a few regular customers stopping by to share one last drink and conversation. As Jack locked the door for the last time as owner, he looked back at the warm, welcoming space he had created. Tomorrow, it would reopen as the flagship Murphy House, a symbol of the radical idea that hospitality could change the galaxy. And he would begin his new role as an ambassador for the belief that understanding was always possible, even between the most unlikely of friends. The Dragon Emperor and the Tavern Keeper had found in each other exactly what they needed. Proof that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, that strength could be found in compassion, and that sometimes the most important conversations happened over a simple drink shared between strangers who became friends. As Jack's ship prepared to depart New Terra Station for the capital of the Empire, he carried with him not just his possessions, but the hopes of billions of beings who would benefit from the new alliance. The journey ahead would be challenging, full of obstacles that neither he nor Zephyr could yet imagine. But they would face those challenges together, guided by the simple human principle that had started it all. Everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're far from home.